introduction. I get to be with Carol today, and I was like, I want to do a lab with you because I've learned so much from her, especially the last couple of years as we've been getting to know each other. And so we're going to jump right in. Is that cool?
Yeah, I think it's cool.
Okay. We're going to talk a lot about partnerships today, and which is obviously we're in a partnership in this project, which I think we've learned a lot along the way. But let's start with kind of defining, like, what does partnership mean to you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I view our partnership with Plywood as this wonderful model. It's been a great model for us and a really good example of what partnership should be, right? There's this play where everyone brings something to the table, right? When you think about the partnerships you've had that may or may not be related to work, that's what really made it a good partnership, at least when I reflect, right? I brought something that was uniquely me, right? Or the organization that I represented brought something that only they could provide or that they provide exceptionally well. And then the other partner did the same. And so the reality for organizations like our CSR organization at Chick-fil-A is that strategic partnerships really bolster, our effectiveness, right? Those are the things that get us over the hump and allow us to be more impactful in our work. We're a relatively small team. We may have resources, sometimes limited resources. We may or may not have the expertise, right? There are community partners that have the expertise. And so, yeah, so that's a little bit more than you asked. That's a little bit of the definition, but also how we really benefit from it.
Totally. I mean, you said you have limited team. How big is your team, just out of curiosity? I don't know if I've ever asked you this.
The community engagement team,
Yeah.
Carolyn and Angelin.
Right. So this is, and people think like, oh, it's Chick-fil-A, like you have endless amounts of people, and it's like, no.
So you know us all,
Right.
right?
It's like,
Yeah.
that's part. Like, I think that's like defining reality. It's like I think there's this perception we have. It's like, oh, you're part of a big corporation. You must have endless amount of staff to do this stuff, and that's not always the reality, right?
Well, our community engagement team is small. However, we do have a larger CSR team, and many of you probably interact with others on the CSR team. But yeah, it helps to have partners in the community.
Yeah, we have to have it. So as people are thinking about this, they're thinking about cultivating relationships and partnerships. How would you recommend how do you start that? Where do you begin that relationship?
Yeah, collaboration whenever you can find it, I think, is good. But it's got to be the right partners for the right reasons. And so I recommend starting with mission alignment, right? Really thinking about strategically, is this organization, whether it's a corporation or another nonprofit, are they strategically aligned with the work that you're doing or that you hope to do? Doing your homework, right? So are corporations' strategic priorities in your wheelhouse? That's a good start, right? That's a good entry point. That ensures that you're bringing something to the table. Now, that's not to say that you can't form new partnerships with new programming, new initiatives. Perhaps it's something you haven't done before, but I think it does increase the success potentially for a strong partnership if you're both working towards a similar goal. And sometimes you see requests for partnerships that maybe there's not that alignment really, or it's such a stretch that it becomes difficult to even start the conversation.
It's funny. I remember one time I was talking to a donor partner of ours, and they were saying one of the great parts of our relationship is knowing what kinds of things they want to fund and then connecting them to that. Like, I think as nonprofits, sometimes we think, well, we need that funding. But the more you share that relationship with to meet the purpose of that partner in some way, like the more they engage actually with you. That's what I've found.
No, I think that's great, Jeff, and it's true. We have engaged with organizations that we've met through other nonprofits, right? And started a partnership with them. So the introduction, it increases our network, right? And so we're certainly open to that and desire that. So I think it's always beneficial when it's mutual. There's a mutual sharing of sorts.
All right. With that, I think I've been noticing sometimes this desperation kind of partnership where, and I'm using when we say partnership, I think there's a lot of terms in that. There could be a donor, there could be a partner on a project, there could be a foundation or social responsibility and corporate statement. There's all these different things. So I've noticed some people lean in, like if you don't partner with us on this, this could be the end. And sometimes it works. And so I'm curious, as a person that has heard a lot of pitches from a lot of people, how do you feel about that in relation to partnership?
Yeah, so in terms of partnership, I would challenge that thinking and approach. Because my question is it sustainable, right? If they give you the money this time and you're able to hold on, have you done the work, or have you strategically put something in place that's going to bridge the gap the next time? Because the likelihood that you can come back to that partner with that same concern, with that same pitch, with that same desperation, it's likely rare that you will continue to receive the partnership needed, unless something changes, right? And so that is not to say that if you hit a bump in the road, all hope is lost. Not meaning that at all. But I do, it's concerning when folks have that as a recurring approach, right?
I could
year after
yes.
year after year, if that is the approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. It's yes. I think you got one shot when it's that case, and
it depends on the organization, right?
It could be.
It
yeah.
depends on the organization. It depends on the passion that the funder has potentially for your work, right?
Yep.
If they just love it and just believe in it, and believe in the leadership and believe in the person, sometimes it continues to happen. But I would have to think it's rare. Right? I see some folks nodding their heads in agreement. So yeah.
So I remember last year you were on a panel with some other leaders of foundations, and something really stuck with me. A couple of the ladies you were with, they they were saying how the worst partnership. I remember this. I forget what the woman's name was that shared this. She was like, do not pitch me on your nonprofit in the grocery store. She was like, this is not starting off a good partnership. Yeah. Like if you run into me and I have a cart and I'm getting my groceries, don't ask me if I got your application. Like don't do that.
Yeah. It was Tanae from the Candida Fund.
It was,
shout out to
it was amazing. It was like I think sometimes we have to sometimes as nonprofit leaders we think this is our one shot. How would you respond to that?
I agree. I think appropriate timing is everything, right? And appropriate timing is everything. And so just as with any other relationship, we want to cultivate it in the appropriate way. Some of you may have heard me say this before, or something similar, but this is my thing. Cultivate the relationship, but honor the process, right? So yes, you want to establish relationships with folks in organizations that lead or that may have the ability to help you engage more deeply or establish a partnership or ultimately get funding, right? Because when I say partnership, I should say this. It's not necessarily funding, right? There are a multitude of ways that we partner as a CSR organization with folks in our community, right? It's through volunteerism, it's through staff engagement, it is by way of education partnerships and skill-based volunteerism. There's so many things that we do. So when I say partnership, I am not speaking solely of funding, right? But I would say it's understanding the organization, understanding how leaders in that organization structure and prefer their engagement, right? Now, if you happen to meet them at an Impact Accelerator event and you have the opportunity to introduce yourself and exchange business cards and tell your story quickly, then absolutely, absolutely. But I think it's about appropriate engagement, and every organization is different, right? Some are more formal than others. Some it's by way of the website, and that's the only way you're going to get in, right? Others, a conversation in the grocery store is perfectly fine. But I respect that comment. Yeah.
In general, it's a really good tip. Don't hit
It
up
is.
somebody for money in the grocery store. They're just trying to get some eggs and milk. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. A couple more questions I have for you,
Yeah.
and then you'll hit me with some hard
I
questions. I think a lot of times people give to Plywood because they believe in me. And at first I didn't. I think over time I've had to accept that.
Embrace it, Jeff.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
They believe that I'm gonna do what I said I'm gonna do. They believe I'm gonna stick through the project. I mean, to get it done. How much of that, as you think about partnerships with the work that you do, how much of the leader impacts that decision?
Yeah. I think that leadership and trust in leadership and the credibility of leadership is everything for an organization, right? Especially a small organization, right? If folks can't believe in the leaders, right, that the leader's going to do what they say they will do, that the leader is going to deliver on the partnership and the relationship. So I think it's everything. I think people absolutely invest in organizations and invest in people, right? So we see it all the time, right? Transition in nonprofit organizations. And sometimes folks are able to hold it steady and in the road. Other times, some of you may have experienced this, where funders will say to you, hey, you're new. We typically wait, if they share that, we typically wait a while before engaging when there's a transition in leadership. Right? So they want to certainly give the new leader an opportunity to engage, but also it's what will this person do with this organization, I think. And so that's my lens. My view is that leadership is absolutely critical and important, and belief and trust in the leaders, what they've seen you do, right? The evidence of your leadership is really important before going into any partnership.
Yeah, we experienced it this year in our cohort. Even that, it was something I hadn't seen it because I'm not the Chick-fil-A representative where everybody's pitching them to do something or whatever. I'm the nonprofit person trying to pitch them to do something. I'm on your side of the spectrum, and I started seeing it through their lens a little bit when some transitions in staffing happened with people we were serving, and I was like, whoa, if I was sitting in your shoes and there was a big grant given or big partnership committed to, and the leadership changed multiple times over multiple years, that would be really concerning, right? And I think I saw it through a different lens this year.
Jeff, I will say that happens, right? And it's not so unusual in the nonprofit world. I see some head nods with that too, right? That you'll see leadership transitions, right? There are those organizations that have long-term leadership. It may be the founders. It may be, and so that's in place. But also in the nonprofit world, I have seen a great deal of movement as leaders come into leadership. They develop, they grow, they move on to larger organizations, they move on to within a network of similar organizations. So I don't know that that is so unusual. I think the process of transition, how it is handled, how it is communicated, um, the um, the change management that takes place within the teams, and also sometimes the size of the organization. If it's a larger organization, it may be a little easier to keep it in the road because there are other leaders in place, right, that can step in and keep things moving. When it is a smaller organization and much of the reputation of the organization is wrapped into the leader, I think that's a little bit more challenging. But certainly in recent years, I've seen movement and transition in nonprofits, probably the last 10 years or so.
All right, you got some questions. You're going
I
to turn the
do.
table. I was drilling you
I have
on some of
questions
this.
for you.
And then hopefully we still have some time to open it up with
Yeah,
others.
absolutely. So, one of the things that I was thinking about when we decided on partnerships is that you personally and Plywood have so many successful partnerships. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to partnership and how you've sort of managed that success?
Yeah, well, personally, my best partnership is my marriage. That's been really good most of the years. There's some hard years. We're celebrating 20 years this year, which is exciting.
Congratulations.
Um,
Yeah.
and but I think that that's a framework for other partnerships. Like if I were to talking to entrepreneurs and they go on a partnership together, I'm like, you're going into a form of marriage here. So you got to make sure you actually really want to do that with this person. Like, do you like the people you're going into partnership with? So at Plywood, we think of partnerships in two ways. We have donor partnerships, like we kind of look at the people that support our work as partners, and then more traditional partners, like a corporate partner. And I think one thing that I feel like we've learned is to slowly walk into partnerships, not jump in quickly. So I kind of relate that back to that marriage conversation. I'm not. Now, some people do get married like in a week. There's those moments, right? There's some people, and it works, and they have the story 50 years later, and whatever. But the commonality is, you got to kind of date a little bit. Do something small in partnership before you go all in. Because partners can either, you kind of alluded to this earlier, they can accelerate your growth. Like things can go faster through partnership, or it can be your biggest liability. And we've all had probably more of the liability side in partnerships. Like things go wrong. And so like, how do you kind of slowly step into it, do a micro project, a smaller thing that you can learn from. And then as a team, you go, do I want to do things? Because there's the project, and then the other question is like, do I want to hang out with these people again? Because you spend a lot of time with other people. And that's where the dating thing kind of happens. Like, do a couple dates before you make the long-term commitments in what you do.
I'll say one. I want to share one thing that's interesting. So, this Impact Accelerator was actually the vision of our Vice President of CSR, Rodney Bullard. And so, when I was sort of given the charge for this, started thinking about partners. And I remember sitting at Plywood Presents some years ago, sitting with Angelin, two-part team, and about halfway through, I leaned over and said to her, Jeff and Plywood need to be our partners for the Accelerator. Now, that was hoping that they would say yes, right? So here we are as a corporate entity looking for the right partner to help us execute on what we needed to do. And we found that through the evidence of the work that they were already doing. And so I just share that. I don't know if did I ever tell you that? Okay, well now you know. So here we are.
I just thought Rodney was like pressuring you. I was just kidding. No, I was
No,
just kidding.
no, yeah.
No, I think you're right though.
Yeah.
You saw. I mean, thanks for saying that. Like, sometimes the partnerships come out of previous success or situations. That's good.
Absolutely. So, another question I had for you was really, there's been so much change in the philanthropic landscape in the last couple of years. Can you tell me or tell us, how have you sort of navigated that, and how have you prepared your team? Because you've had a growing team, right? In this time of change, this time of transition. Are there some things that you've done specifically to help your folks?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you all are from Atlanta, we have a co-working space that's in the West End. I'd love to invite all of you there sometime. We opened our co-working space 2 weeks before the pandemic started. So it was like this big strategic plan we had. I remember we had this opening party. There's like 500 people. There's a DJ. It's awesome. It's like, this place is on the rise. Gonna kill it. And then, wait, we got to go home. How are we going to do co-working from home? This doesn't work. So we had to we had to change like everything. It's like, how do you? And I'm no different than all of you, but I think you have to kind of go, okay, even as things are changing, what are we still committed to? What is the mission of the organization, and keep going back to it? I mean, even like this week, like things change this week on an event like this. And, you know, I have a team and they had expectations. They wanted to go home at one time last night, you know, or it's like, okay, but things change and things will always change. And, okay, why are we doing this? What is the point of this? Why is this important? Why are we engaged in this? Kind of constantly going back to the importance of the mission that we're doing. And I think from a staffing standpoint, which I think a lot of us probably struggle through, because we are trying to get purpose-driven people at a portion potentially of what they could make somewhere else, right? So you have to lean in hard on why. Why are they a part of this, and what, you know? And then on the flip side, for me as a leader, I'm like, you know, if someone stays on my team, and this is probably a harsh reality, if someone stays on my team for 3 years, I'm like a pretty good boss at this point. I'm a good, like, you have to kind of set the reality for yourself as a leader that there's a lot of transition in this space. You're oftentimes hiring young 20-somethings that are trying to figure out life. And, you know, and so, yeah, if they're on your team for a little bit, so what is my responsibility? My responsibility isn't, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I was thinking about it through this lens. My responsibility isn't to keep everyone on my team. My responsibility is to set them up for their purpose. And which is hard, because sometimes I'm just like, well, get the thing done, you know, or whatever. And with all the change happening surrounding us right now, we have to keep pointing back to that. And I think that goes to donors, it goes to staff. Like, hey, donors come and go, right? They might, if you keep a donor for 3 years, you're probably pretty good at communication, you know, like. So realize there's going to be an ebb and flow of those relationships, and accept that.
Okay. No, that's helpful. So we have two unique, our lens will be different, right? You're coming from one side, I'm coming from the other side. We happily meet in the middle. What I'd love to hear from you is, in terms of strategic alliances and partnerships, how, or do you, engage your board of directors? What's their role in that process?
Yeah, I think it depends on. It's a good question. It depends on the partners, and how they can be most helpful. So, one thing, we have a really healthy board, and for the record, leading a board is very difficult. You know, the greatest thing I hear is the tension of is the board and me on the same page. You know, as an executive director, I constantly hear about that. Do you guys have those tensions? Yeah. Okay. So I think the more I include my board, the more vested they are in our projects. But a lot of board members, they don't have time to like lead our organization. So it's like you have to, they need to know what's happening, and you need to be clear of how they can help and be direct. So for instance, if for tonight we have some people doing a thing here tonight, I didn't invite every board member to this thing tonight. I thought of specific board members that had a specific purpose in being here. Hey, I'd like you to be here because this organization is presenting and I think you'd be interested in knowing about it. Okay? If I would do a generic message to our whole board about tonight, no one will respond. So be intentional about the asks. And then they're like, oh, this is a good use of my time. A phrase, a value we have in our organization is earning the right to be heard, which is sometimes controversial in some spaces. But in this space, I think it really is fitting. If I ask a board member for something of their time, their energy, their talents, whatever, and it was worth their time, talents, energy, or whatever, the next time I ask them to do something, they're going to jump at it. If I invite them into this and it was not worth their time, what are they going to respond the next time? They're not going to. So like over time, you start building this energy and influence where when you ask them and are direct, they want to be involved.
So one last question. And I always think there's as much to be learned from our failures as our successes. Can you tell us about a time when maybe a strategic partnership didn't work out so well, how you recovered from that, and any learnings there?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that came to mind for me, there was a project that we started in Clarkston years ago. It was called our Billboard Bag Project. And we were upcycling, I don't know if you even know about this. We were upcycling old billboards, the vinyls that they put on billboards. And it was a refugee job training program. And it was like a sewing project. We made and sold all these bags. It's hard to even imagine what they look like. But they were pretty cool, and we sold a lot of them, and it worked to an extent until it didn't work. And the partnership that was hardest was because I had created, and our organization had created jobs for these women that were doing it. And ultimately, I felt the deep responsibility to these friends, these people. And I remember when, as a board, we had to make a strategic decision of what our organization was going to be about going forward. And so it was directly related to this project it ended up having a lot of costs to it. It was amazing for the women involved in it. And so we had this like board vote about whether we were going to continue it. And I thought it was going to be like a 50-50 split kind of thing. And it wasn't. At that time we had 11 board members, and we counted the votes, and it was 10-1. I was the only one that wanted to keep it. And I think what I learned through that is I was so relationally involved in this project that I couldn't kind of look at it as a leader, what needed to happen for the sake of the organization. So all that to say, that project in a lot of ways failed in my mind. And I feel like it was my fault as the leader, you know. So in hindsight, what came of it was something way better. I was starting a relationship with this friend, Kitty Murray. She started this thing called Refuge Coffee. If any of you guys heard of Refuge in Clarkston. And so it was like this transition happened that became exponentially better than what I could lead as the leader for that community, for those women. And again, I still think it was a failure in a lot of ways in mine, but there are moments, I think, where you have to kind of go, who are we becoming and who are we not becoming? And it was a really hard season for me. So that's a short version of the story.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think there's so much to be learned in that. And I probably shouldn't have used the word failure, right? Where you had a challenge, or there was an opportunity.
No, I claimed it as a failure. I I remember writing an email to our whole email list, and because they had all supported this project,
Right.
you know, and saying, "Hey, I feel like I failed in this project and all this stuff," and I received more responses from that one email than any email I've ever sent, which you all know. Nobody responds to nonprofit emails, let's be honest. But, I mean, it was like hundreds of responses that was, Jeff, we're in this with you. You didn't fail. You tried something. It's so great to see that you can acknowledge things don't work. I was just thinking about quitting this other thing because it wasn't working. This kind of was helpful. I mean, it was just over, and it had not very few things related to the project and more things about being honest as a leader. And still to this day, you know, I don't know if it was, I still wonder what the best situation was for the women involved in that project. But it was a learning experience.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, great mark of leadership, right? To be honest with that, and being transparent with your board and your supporters. So should we allow everyone else to ask a few? Do we have
5 minutes?
5
Yeah, let's take
minutes?
some questions.
Any questions?
Let's do the back corner first. Go back there.
And so I think having both of your perspectives is really helpful because, thanks. Having both of your perspectives is so helpful because, like you said, Carol, like you're representing these different sides of the coin here. So my question is around approaching partnerships, and you both have touched on this a little bit. I know, like, we have a partnership, or are beginning a really exciting one with Chick-fil-A right now, and we're so fortunate to have seemingly the right people in it to help us. Like Carol, Angelina are there. Jolie's been helping with that. When we approach other partners and are looking at what the right corporate partner is to support a program or support a partnership, sometimes we might recognize within our own agency, we might say, hey, you know, I don't know if these are the right people within this company to be working with, or it might, like, communication might be difficult, or there are certain difficulties. Do you have advice on how, as the nonprofit coming in asking for partnership, one can go about identifying issues to be able to clarify and make a partnership really work? If you're able to see them or not able to see them, maybe you just know, hey, there's something's not working. How do we approach a solution for that with that corporate partner?
You know, I would say that I think one thing is certainly clarity of expectations on both sides coming into the partnership. In a past life, I was on the other side of the coin, and so I understand that sometimes organizations will come in and they are so eager to establish the partnership that they may have come to the table with this, but it evolves into this, and you're not necessarily fully equipped to address it. And the corporate side just may not have the ability to focus folks on it in the way that you would like and give it the time and attention that's required. So I think as much clarity as possible at the onset in terms of what the expectations are on both sides, because in order for a partnership to be successful, everyone has to be pouring into it, right? Whether it's nonprofit to nonprofit, corporation to nonprofit. And then hopefully that you're partnering with folks who have the ability to hear feedback from your side as well, right? You have a perspective about what's going to make the partnership successful and what will deliver the best possible result. And so I think voicing that in an appropriate way is what you can do to start. And sometimes folks are hesitant to do that, right?
That's a good answer. Let's take another question. There was a couple in the back right there.
So I'm Stephanie with Family Point Resources. I loved what you said, Carol, about cultivating the relationship and depending on the process. So when I think about our partnerships and relationships, there's kind of two things that we often encounter. One is the desire for productivity and efficiency and for positive outcomes. And then the other side of those partnerships and relationships is the messiness of being human. So my question is, how do you create margins to invite and welcome and work through the interruptions and the messiness that is part of the process of getting to positive outcomes?
Is that a question for me or for Jeff?
I think Carol really wants to answer that question.
Because I see Jeff just burning up to respond to that.
Well, for one, I think it sounds like there's some situations in your head that are real, probably right now. So every partnership does include humans. Okay. So let's acknowledge that as a starting place. That, you get an email from somebody that is supposed to be a strategic partner and they were having a bad day, right? Or there's a quick, because we've all done this. We've all responded to situations not from our most healthy place, right? So if we can kind of try to filter things through that, I think it helps, whether that's your staffing, donors, partners, whatever. So I don't have a big solution for you on this, but there will be hiccups because you are dealing with humans with different worldviews, with different perspectives, with different privileges, with different identities. And, in a healthy state for me, some of you guys know the Enneagram. Potentially I'm an 8 Enneagram. I'm a challenger. I go at whatever situation I possibly can. But in a healthy state, I'm like, there's something else oftentimes happening within the human that has nothing to do with me or with our partnership or what the deal is. So sometimes I'll say, hey, are you okay? Not really as a friend, how are you doing? And it's amazing how the relational connection really helps all the other things play out. I don't know your situation, but I could tell there's something there. But that would be my answer.
And if I could add a little to that, I would say, in addition, this probably goes back to an earlier response for me, but as much clarity as possible around expectations and limitations, right? I think the honesty of here is what we are capable of delivering, and how often do you want to be communicated to? I'd recommend this, that, or the other. For me, I find that that's extremely helpful because the other side of it, Jeff, is the strategic partner that won't answer your emails, right? It's not that you have to create margin. You just want them to respond to you because you're trying to deliver on something. And so there's the other side of that as well. So trying to create a space to talk about what we both really have to do to make this thing successful, I think ultimately benefits everyone. How are we looking, Buki?
We're out of
We
time.
are right on time.
We're right on time. Related to both those, also, not all partnerships are supposed to last forever.
Yeah.
So
And not all partnerships are good partnerships.
Right.
And you may realize that. Right?
Yeah. So and you never know what's on the other side of that. So anyway, okay, we have to go because I want you guys to all get back in the main session because Charles is going to be speaking over there in just a minute. Can we give it up for Carol Waddy?
And Jeff.